Alright, so what we're going to do today is my son's Halloween costume. He's going to be a skeleton. And we have to have this done by this Friday, and it is Sunday night. So I went to the store and I got some fabric. I got 1.5 yards of this black felt or fleece, and I've got 1 yard of felt, and this will be cut into bones, and this will be the main outfit that I will applique the bones on. And for a pattern, we're going to use this, which is an outfit that I made for my other kid a couple of years ago when he was a mummy. So that's the pants, and then here is the shirt. So I'll show you how to do that. That way all you have to do is find a pair of pants that your kid has and a shirt. One quick note about fleece is it is stretchy in one direction. So know which direction you can stretch it in, and that way you can properly lay your pattern over it depending on which way you might want it to stretch. Typically for me, I like it to stretch over the width of the body, so this is the stretchy end. I'm going to make sure that the shirt and the pants follow this seam. So if it needs to stretch over clothing, if it's too cold for Halloween and he needs to wear extra clothes, I don't have to worry about the outfit not fitting. He can put on another pair of sweats and still put these on without a problem. The other nice thing about fleece and felt is you don't have to hem it if you don't want to. I will probably hem mine just for that finished look, but if I start running out of time, it's not a necessity, so we'll see what happens. I've only got a few days. I've got his costume to make, I've got my costume to make, and I've got day-to-day things I still have to do as well. So this will be a fun project. I'm going to go ahead and get my pieces laid out, and then we'll flip the camera back on. Alright, you can see I've got my shirt laid out on top. I folded the sleeves in, and this is the stretchy side, and it's also folded. So when I go to cut this out, I'm going to actually cut 2 copies. I've got a pretty good amount of space on this side, and I'm going to use this side to cut the arm sleeves out, and that'll leave me with all this other fabric for the pants. Another quick note, for this particular project for the pants, you are going to need some sort of elastic, and I would recommend a much thicker elastic than what I currently have on hand, but this will be used for the waist of the pants. And if you don't have a sewing machine, that's okay. The fleece and the felt will be really easy to sew by hand if you're going to go that route, although I wouldn't give yourself just a week to do it, especially if you've got other things going on like work and sleep and kids. I'm going to keep my scissors somewhere between 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch away. You do want to give yourself some seam allowance. Another thing to note is I know my neck piece is a little big for my kid, so I'm actually going to, because this part does stretch, I'm going to give him somewhat of a turtleneck. So I'm going to cut straight up right there. So I'm going to go this way, this, and then like that. And again, you can pin it in place if you want. If you're going to pin it, make sure you've got both layers of your new fabric and your shirt, and you're just going to put the pin through like so. I like to cut the fabric and just kind of get a smaller piece for me to work with as far as cutting, so I'm going to actually cut this out just like this. When you get to the arm, we're going to indent just a little bit. And then here we go with the sleeve. And let's remember that we are making this a turtleneck, so we are going to go straight up. And we can get this piece of fabric out of the way so we have more space to work with at this point. So that's the main arm, or the main body, torso. Next we'll do the arms. Alright, so we laid our fabric back out. This is what we just cut out and removed from our 1.5 yards of fabric. And we're going to do the arm. And the arm is going to be one piece that you will fold over and stitch on the bottom. And if you can see that, that's the bottom. There's the armpit, and then the bottom of the arm, the seam right there. And what that really is just a half circle. So it's going to go circle, and then it's going to taper. We are going to use this as a very rough stencil, or the other thing we could try to do is fold this and put this right here and cut along there. The problem with that is you will be cutting through 4 layers of fabric, and depending on how good or how bad your scissors are, you may not want to do that. So I'm going to show you this way. First thing, let's go ahead and just remove it from this bolt of fabric so it's easier to work with. And it is folded, so by doing that with it folded, we are getting 2 copies at once. And now here comes the tricky part. I'm going to actually go from here because this part's already cut. So I'm going to go from here to here to get a rough idea of where I want that to be. And I'm going to drag this up just a little bit to give me some seam allowance, especially if I plan on hemming it. And try to get this as straight as possible. So, let's go ahead and start cutting. Okay, so we've got this cut so far. And we are going to cut a half circle. we've got 2 sleeves. Again, make sure you know where your stretch is. And I made mine a little longer than what I probably should have, but at the end of the day, when you're finishing up your costume, if you need to cut 2 inches off, especially with fleece or felt or fabric like that, if you need to cut 2 inches off at the last minute to make it fit properly, you can go ahead and do that without worrying about hemming it or any of the stitches coming out that are holding the thing together. There's a lot of other fabrics that you can't just do that with. So that's a good thing about this. And we will start stitching it together, and once we get it stitched together, we're going to look at anatomy so we can see the rough bone layout, and then we'll come up with some ideas for cutting this into pieces of bones. For this costume plus makeup, we're looking at so $6.50 plus the makeup. The makeup was $6, but that includes a little bit for my peacock costume, $12. That's not bad. And I almost forgot to cut the pants. So the next piece we're going to work on will be the pants. We're going to take our fabric, we're going to make sure it's folded, so we've got 2, and we're going to look for where the stretch is. And I want it to stretch along the waist. Very important. I have messed up on that before, so now I always know to double check. Alright, and here's our pants. Oops. And what we're going to do is you can either just follow the pant leg and sew it into 2 pieces, the front and the back, or you can basically cut out the pant leg and then cut up the middle, and that would leave you with 4 pieces. So you would have 2 back pieces, 2 front pieces, and that's what these ones are. These are a 4-piece. But it's just a Halloween costume, and I'm going to do 2 pieces. So I'm going to first line my fabric up as far as I can over to the edge. Now you'll notice I stopped strictly following this, and that's because there is elastic in here, and I'm going to put elastic in this pair. And at this point, I'm just going to go up. And I'm going to cut. So when I go to sew this, I'm just going to stitch it right there. Stitch it down there. Alright, so I found this, I don't know if you can see that, I found this picture online to give me a rough idea of what the skeleton's going to look like, and I did a very rough sketch. And I've got my son here, and what I'm going to do with him is we're going to do just some very basic measurements. And I'm going to use this paper, and I'm just going to mark some of, can I see this? I'm going to mark some of his measurements. So this will be the arm. And we're going to do a top and a lower. And then the next page, and hopefully he's short enough that all of this will work. The next page is going to be the leg, and we're going to do the lower and the top. Then I need a basic measurement of his torso. Come back. As well as a basic measurement of his hips. So we need a basic torso measurement. And I apologize about the lighting. What we're going to do is I'm going to have him have his back to me. And what I really want to measure is where his rib cage needs to be. So this paper actually takes up just about to the bottom of his rib cage. So I'm actually not going to make any marks on that. However, if your child's rib cage, if your child's smaller and the rib cage came up, I would just make a light mark on the paper, because these are going to be used as our templates for cutting out the skeleton. So we're going to go ahead and do the leg. Could you hold the paper up to your hip? So there's his hip. And the top leg is actually as long as it needs to be, so the bottom leg should be as well. So those are good measurements. This one's turning out super easy. So we're going to measure his arm next. Now his arm's a little different. Can you hold the paper up there? We're going to move the paper up to the top of his shoulder. Sorry, I can't tell if you can see. I almost poked him in the eye. And we're going to mark where his elbow is, which is right there. And his lower should be the same for proportion, so I don't need to worry too much about that. I'll put it there. And then what I'm going to do is these very basic patterns on here. It looks like a mess. I've got front, sides, and the back all on one sheet. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to draw it on here. I'll show you that before I cut it out. Alright, so I've got this stuff sketched out to the size that I measured them in. And I'm going to cut each individual one of these out. This is the top leg. I'm going to need 2 copies of it from the fabric, 2 of the knee, 2 of this lower leg bone. This is going to be a side leg bone, which I'll need 2 of as well. The only thing I haven't drawn out quite yet is the back, which will be shoulder blades and the rib cage and the spine. Here's the arms. And the torso I'll explain. I've got it quite a mess. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rib cage, and originally I had it going straight across, and I thought, well, that's going to look like a striped shirt. So I'm going to, when I cut it out, I'm going to do quite a swoosh. When I get it cut out, I will show you guys. The only thing I got left to do, 2 things actually, is I still have to do the hips and the shoulder blades. I'm going to cut all the pieces out so you can see the torso. I'm only going to cut half of it out, and I'm going to put it on a fold of the fabric when I cut the fabric with it. Okay, I've got my pieces cut out. This is what I decided to do with my rib cage slash torso. I will put it on the fold. I made this piece a little extra long. Hopefully it looks right. This is my first skeleton costume, and I am just making up the directions as I go. One thing that I told you that I said incorrectly was the amount of some of these arm and leg pieces. We're going to need 4 of those top arm pieces. That's what's going to connect from the collarbone right here to the arm, and then that's the top part, and then the lower part will come in like that, and we're also going to need 4 pieces of that. So we need 2 for each arm in the front and 2 for each arm in the back. The side arm, which is going to go there, will go on the top of the fabric on the lower part of the arm. We only need 2 of those, and the same with the leg. So we need 4 of those top pieces cut out, 4 of the lower pieces cut out. We'll need 2 knees, and on the back of the lower leg we will need 1 piece that will go along the side of the fabric. So front and side. I'm going to pin all of this to my felt right here. It's kind of a thick fabric, so I'm comfortable with cutting out 2 layers of it, but when I do the lower leg, the top leg, the lower arm, and the top arm, I'm going to actually fold it over just once, so every cut I'll get, you know, 2, so I'll have to cut it out twice. That way I don't put too much strain on my scissors. And I'll pin it together to cut it. I'll go ahead and start that, and then I'll show you, and I'll show you me cutting some of the fabric, and we'll go from there. Alright, so I've got everything pinned. We're going to start cutting. Keep in mind that these 4 items we're going to need to cut again, so we will need 4 of those. I have my fabric folded. Along my fold I have the back spine, the shoulder blade, ouch, and then some of the ribs. And then here's the front along the fold. So when I go to cut this, it will stay as one piece once you unfold it. Hello? So there's my first piece. And we'll just continue to do this until we get all of our pieces cut out. I'm staying pretty close to my paper template. I'm not going to be hemming anything, so I don't need that allowance on the fabric. And if you're not familiar with sewing, you're going to probably do it the same way that I'm doing it, where it's going to be more of an applique that you're stitching on top of the shirt and pants. Alright, so you can see my pieces cut out, and I've got them pinned to, this is going to be the back of the pants. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to try to stitch it, and I'm going to try to stitch as close as I can to the edge and just go all the way around. If you don't have a sewing machine, or if you don't want to use a sewing machine, you don't have to. I will be using mine. And we will see how this goes. I'm hoping it goes well, because it is 11:37 p.m. and I am exhausted. So, depending on what kind of sewing machine you have, you probably have a variety of settings. I've got my needle as far to the left as I can get it. And like I said, I'm going to try to keep the needle as far to the edge as I can. You want to keep your pin cushion nearby so that you can pull your pins out as needed. And let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and stitch all of these onto the back part of the body. I'm following this same method, and then we will pin our next batch onto the front. Really quick before I turn the camera off, the hip bone, first off, you don't want to have anything directly on the edge at this point. And the reason is you will have a seam, and it's going to be somewhere between 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch depending on what you need to do, and that's going to be so we can stitch the other side of the pants on. But you'll see that I have this hip bone sticking off. When I go to applique this, I'm going to actually only applique probably up to where that pin is. I'm going to leave me maybe 2 inches or so. That way I will finish this piece once I have the front side of the pants stitched onto this, but before I do the waistband. So, alright, I'm almost done with doing all of the appliques. I've got most of them stitched on, and I've still got to do the center part of this. This is the back, the shoulder blades, part of the rib cage, some of the spine. So I'll show you what I've been doing. Now if you're going to use your sewing machine, it's been taking me roughly probably about 5 minutes per average bone piece on the sleeves and the pants, and then it's taking me about a 1/2 hour to do each side of the shirt. And I line the edge of this up with my foot to the center, so I'm doing an applique stitch of about 1/8 of an inch, give or take. My stitching is very sloppy, but that's okay. So we're gonna go ahead and start this so you can see what we do. So we just start that there's a lot of turning of the fabric for all of the pieces, and I couldn't remember if I taped or recorded any of the stitching, so I'm recording it now. And you'll be turning it every which way, and as you can see, I am not 100% on the seam. Now, depending on if you're somewhat familiar with the sewing machine, so far this project has taken me probably 5 hours. And I've got probably another 2 hours remaining on it, maybe an hour and a half. I imagine that once I get all of the applique done, it should only be a very brief moment that it's going to take to stitch everything together, so possibly even just an hour. So expect that if you are familiar with the sewing machine. If you're not familiar with the sewing machine and you're using a sewing machine on a very basic skill level, it's probably going to take you a little bit longer because you're going to stitch slower, and that's okay. And if you're going to hand sew it, it's going to take you a very long time, so make sure you have plenty of time for that before Halloween. I would recommend a sewing machine. So I'm going to finish this and then we'll lay the pieces out and we'll go from there. Alright, so I have all my appliques on. This is going to be the front of the shirt. This is going to be the front of the pants. And if you look, you can kind of see my stitching. So that's the front. This is the arm. This will be the top of the arm to where the hand comes out. And the sleeve will eventually fold over like that. Two of those. So there's that part. And then I'll show you the back. So this is the back, so that's the back of the shirt. And these are the back of the pants. And we will start getting this pinned together so we can stitch it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our thread out, because right now we have our applique thread in, which was the white with the white bobbin down there. And we're going to change it to black if I have black. If I don't, I'll just find the dark colored thread that I think will work. Maybe dark blue or green, or I'm sure I've got something in my sewing box. So I'll get this rethreaded in the machine, and I'll get the camera put up on the pedestal and show you how to pin it together for stitching it into two pieces, pair of pants and a shirt. So the first thing we're going to stitch together will be our pants. Get my pins. This is the back of the pants. And remember how we had that piece sticking off? We are going to fold it over and pin it like that, just so it stays out of our way. We're going to put the faces of the fabric together. That means that whichever fabric is facing outward or the public, that's what we're going to stick together. Okay, so we've got it all pinned together, and when we stitch, we are going to stitch along the side of the leg, the insides of the leg, on the other side of the leg. Make sure you don't stitch your foot holes or your waist shut. So let's go ahead and load it up and we'll start stitching. So I've got my machine all threaded up with the new thread. I do have black thread, but I didn't have a black bobbin, so I'm just using a dark blue, and I've got another dark blue right here that I'll toss in there just so I don't have partial threads left over. And what we're going to do is pin side up, we're going to stitch along the edge. As you come to a pin, I recommend removing it before stitching over it, only because I have broken a needle from not doing that. I am going to make one quick adjustment to my machine. I'm going to take my needle and instead of having it to the far left, I'm going to move it to the center. My machine has a setting for this. When I turn mine on, it's automatically set to the left. Some machines are probably automatically set to the center, but I'd recommend centering your needle before doing this next step. As we stitch down, we're going to hold our fabric with this hand, we're going to help it move with our left hand, and we're going to try to keep the foot of the press along the seam, and that'll give us about 1/4 of an inch seam. Whoops. Sorry about that. Then you want to lock your thread by going back a couple of stitches and then proceeding forward. So, it looks like I made a slight mistake. And I stitched really close to the edge of my felt. Normally what I would do is I would undo that stitch, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just go back a little bit and go back over it, back on that 1/4 of an inch seam. And we're getting down to the cuff of our pants, and we are going to lock our stitch in by going back a couple of stitches. And that way it doesn't come unraveled. So you'll continue to do that 2 more times, once down this side of the leg, and then I'm going to start here, and I'm going to, in one continuous stitch, I'm going to stitch all the way around the inner part of the leg, and we will, after that, we will turn it right side out, just so we can look at it, kind of get an idea of what it looks like. We will have to switch back to the white thread eventually, but I'm going to wait till the very end because the shirt also has a rib cage sticking off. Really quick, I wanted to show you what I'm going to do. I'm getting to the crotch area of the pants, and I'm going to reinforce it. I'm going to reinforce that stitch just because there's going to be a lot of extra movement, and that's something you should consider doing. So we sew like normal. And then as we come to the crotch, we're gonna go across and we're gonna go back. And we're gonna go across one more time. So we have 3 thread hold right there. And we're almost done. We're almost done with the pants. Alright, so we've got the shirt to do next, which is going to be a little bit trickier because we have the arm sleeves that have to go on. So again, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pin the front to the back. But when you get to these armholes, the part that we did a partial C in, we are not going to pin that. We will attach that to it. But let's go ahead, we're going to pin the shoulders. So right there, we're going to stop pinning for a moment. Let's also pin this in just so we don't stitch it. And I'll pin the other side. Okay, so the shoulders are pinned. And the sleeves are just about the same on both sides, although I do have this bone I want to be in the front of the shirt. I can tell this is the back of the shirt because I can see my spine. Well, actually, before we stitch the sleeves on, let's go ahead and do the shoulders real quick. We are not going to stitch down this side yet. I'm going to wait till the sleeve's attached. So I sew from the sleeve and just turn and go straight down. All right. So we are actually going to undo our sides. And you're probably thinking, now I know why it took you 5 hours to get to this point. But I was doing some thinking about the sleeves. And I'm thinking just maybe I want to connect them like this. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. But I'm just attaching the sleeve to the C section of this. So you can kind of see what it's going to look like once it gets stitched together. And you could, I'll probably go ahead and just stitch this really quick. And that way I have less pins in my way when I go to stitch everything else. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and put the other arm on. Oops. And then we will start stitching it up. So for the arm sleeve, I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to start where the pens are. So my needle's right in front of my first pen. And I'm going to go ahead and remove it so it doesn't get caught on anything. And then don't forget the back stitch. Alright, and I'm going to do the same to the other arm. And then we will start on the next part after that. Alright, so I've got the sleeves sewn on. And then all we have left to do other than hemming and putting elastic in and any final touches is we just have to stitch along here, and then we're going to curve over and do the edge, and we'll do that on both arms. But really quick, just to show you what the sleeve looks like, we're going to turn the shirt So that's what it looks like. I don't know if you can see the whole thing. There you go. And we're going to turn it back inside out. And then we are going to stitch along the edge. And I'll finish up the rib and the hip bone. Alright, we are in the home stretch, guys. I've got my shirt pinned together, I've got my sleeves pinned together, and we are going to start stitching it. When we get to the armpit, we're going to do the same thing we did to the crotch area. And we're going to make sure we reinforce that area very well. So we're going to stitch the other side the same way we just did this one. And then we will finish our appliques and we'll be done for the night. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so I've got this stitched. Got the front with our ribs, spare ribs, and the back. What I'm going to do for the ribs, I'm going to lay the shirt on its side. I'm going to take a needle or a pin, just pin it down. Do the same with this side. Just pin it down. Make sure it's just on that single layer. And then while we're at it, we will go ahead and do that with the hips as well. Pin it down. And pin it down. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did with the appliques. Only this time it's going to be a little bit more difficult, and I'm actually not going to stitch the whole thing. I'm going to just probably try to get as much of it as I can, but I'm probably not going to get the whole thing. So the hips are on. Alright, so we're done for the day. We'll measure our kid tomorrow and see what else we have to do. But I think so far, so good. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do, I put this on my kid and it fit. I don't have any hemming to do, which I'm kind of surprised. I thought he was shorter than he is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these pants and I'm going to fold over the top by about 1 inch. And I'm going to hem all the way around until I get to the back. And I'm going to leave a slight opening. And that way I can slide my elastic through it to make the elastic waist for his pants.
Close to 90 or I have to.
I'm going to turn my pants inside out.
I think so, yeah. Why?
And
You want me to check or something?
I'm going to pick an area to start.
Oh yeah, good.
And when I get to that white hip bone, I'll probably just lift my needle instead of stitch through it. I'm actually going to start on this side after
What you got there?
that hip bone.
Why bad in there?
Alright, so I'm going to lift my needle and I'm going to skip ahead ever so slightly to about there. That way I don't have black thread just going through my hip bone. Okay, so there's where I started. I have an opening right there. I'm going to pull this out. Alright, I'm going to bring my kid in and I'm going to wrap this around him to get the width of his belly. And because I'm using this elastic, I'm going to cut 2 pieces because it's not very thick. If you have thicker elastic, you can get away with just one of it. And I'm going to take a safety pin, and I'm going to put it through both of those, just like that. And then I'm going to fish it through. I don't know if you can see this. Let me back up a little bit. So I'm fishing it through that hole that I had. If you had thicker elastic, you can probably stitch it, and I'd recommend stitching it. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to cut my excess off.
Oh. Yeah, I still have 5 of those. Last time I bought them, I didn't use them. I'm trying to save up for like, I'm trying to save up to get the maximum amount. That would be good.
Then we're going to turn our pants
5.6, all over 40 with at least 190.
the right way. And if you want to carefully stitch some of this area without getting
easy way for me is I go to the joint knot
without getting the elastic or your
and
applique.
then I do that one.
That way I don't have pieces coming out so much. Alright, and I will have him try it on. I think I'm done. I'm out of time as far as getting this costume done. I have another costume I still have to work on. So let's get him tried on. Alright, and this is what it looks like. Can you turn around? Alright, so I think it came out pretty cute. Hopefully you can find some gloves and something for the shoes. So it looks like bones.